Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Are open. I am your host, Doug Heller, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, joined as always by my co-host, Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic at ArmchairCinema.com and ArmchairOscars.com. Hello, Jerry.
Hello, from the spirit world.
Yes, today we are going to be tackling our second ghost story for Shocktober, from 2001, Guillermo del Toro's, in my opinion, first masterpiece, The Devil's Backbone. Now, I'm going to let you take this for a couple of minutes because this was your first time. I've introduced you now to 3 films that we've recorded on The Wild Bunch, Hard Day's Night, and now Devil's Backbone, with 2 really lousy ones coming up. So my track record my track record is now I've introduced you to 5 movies. I'm 3 and 2 basically. You've introduced me to 3 movies. You are 1 and 2, so you have some slack to pick up, my friend.
Actually, this was the first time I ever saw this, The Devil's Backbone. And to be honest with you, it's been a classic on hold movie.
Mm-hmm.
One of those movies that I have been intending to get to, but never really did. It was like, I'll get to it eventually.
It was like The Wild Bunch and Hard Day's Night.
Well, one of the problems with this movie is it's a foreign film.
Mm-hmm.
And a foreign film, like a silent film, requires your attention.
Absolutely, every bit of it.
You have to sit and you have to actually watch it. You can't do other things.
No.
Which I tend to do when I'm watching a movie sometimes.
I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes myself, most of the time.
But this one has been sitting there. It's been sitting on it's been in my Netflix queue, and it's been on my DVR for the last year. And I have been really intending to get to it. I just haven't made the time. So that's one of the great things about this show, is that it forces me to get to movies that I haven't really gotten to yet, or have been putting off, like The Wild Bunch, like Devil's Backbone, any of this stuff. What's interesting here And I have a great affinity for personal projects,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me
film
too.
projects. When the director really takes the um, approach of this is a story I want to tell,
Mm-hmm.
rather than I'm a director for hire, or I'm going to do something for the commercial appeal, or I'm just making some money so I can make other personal projects.
Right, 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 right.
This is one of those films that's a personal project, and you can
Yeah.
tell. I listened to a little bit of his commentary. Guillermo del Toro, his heart was in this,
Oh yeah.
really. And the story begins with a comment that Del Toro made that history is ultimately an inventory of ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting about this film is that it is very much about the sins of the past.
Yep.
It's very much about the spiritual side not being so um, inviting and loving.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the idea that it surrounds children is an
Yeah.
interesting idea
Yeah.
because most ghost stories surround adults who are
Except
better
for the
prepared.
except for the three that we've decided to talk about on this in this month of
Yeah, yeah, I know this was not by design.
No,
The
it
three
was.
films we're talking about five horror films during Shocktober, and we, without even any design or plan, we chose. Well, our plan was we chose two films. We each had a choice, two apiece, and then one that we chose together.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mutual choice. Three of them are ghost stories.
Yes. And
All three deal with children.
we didn't realize that until after we'd already set them in the program.
We didn't. I did not realize this until I started watching The Devil's Backbone last night, the first time, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, this has something in common with Poltergeist, which we talked about last week,
Mm-hmm.
which is another movie about a child
Mm-hmm.
um, surrounded by all kinds of supernatural things and ghosts who want to use them for this purpose and that kind of thing. And again, it'll happen again with The Shining.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that it's interesting because when you're a child, your imagination is far more open to certain things.
True.
Your imagination is far more apt to deal with certain things or process certain things. When you're an
Real
adult,
reality is easier to process because you can imagine it's easier to imagine.
right? When you're an adult, you're like that.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, you're more open to fantastical things, ghosts,
Right.
Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, all kinds of fantastical things. But when you're an adult, it becomes a little more practical,
Mm-hmm.
and you become far more cynical. And one of the points I wanted to make about this film, we're going to get into the story here in a second, is that I was amazed by how little of the ghost story exists in this story.
Yeah. That's what I
It's a
love
ghost
about it.
story. It's a ghost story without being um, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a ghost story without being a haunted house movie.
Yeah.
You know, it's Industrial Light and Magic doesn't sweep in and take over the movie.
Right. It's a story about kids with the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War set in 1939, so it's near the end of the Franco uh, war, right around World War II, when the communists were fighting the fascists and losing.
It's actually in the last week of the Spanish Civil
Yeah,
War.
yeah. And so it's all the great causes were over there fighting. Ernest Hemingway was fighting for the communists against Franco, and it's a very storied time. It was the war before the war, and
Even the Americans were over there
hmm
because FDR had um, put in a policy of neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of volunteers went over there with the
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Yeah.
That was the
Yeah.
Americans' first involvement in the war.
Mm-hmm. So, and it was a very very difficult time. It raged on for about 3 years, um, and so it's really with the backdrop of that. It's set in this orphanage in the middle of nowhere, in
In
the
the
middle of
middle of nowhere, there's nothing out there.
nowhere. It is a day's walk to the closest town
Yeah.
in the arid desert-like Spanish countryside out with nothing around it.
And somebody does try to walk.
Yeah, that
At the end
doesn't
of the
work
movie,
out for
somebody
her.
does try to walk it, and it's like, yeah, you look around when they're looking out on the horizon. There's nothing there.
Mm-mm.
This is like on the outpost of hell or something, in some kind of purgatory or
Yeah.
something. It's it's and it's dirty and it's filthy and it's really
It's very reminiscent of the Spanish desert that Sergio Leone shot a lot of his spaghetti westerns in.
yeah, it is, and it's also I guess we should get into the story a little bit. This kid, um, probably what, about 10 years old,
Yeah,
in
he's around 10, and his he's taken to this orphanage that's run by communist sympathizers, and
his
his
father's
father
kid.
his father was killed, but they haven't told him. Um,
Yeah.
and his father was killed fighting for the communists against Franco, and they're dropping him here because they know it's a friendly place
Mhm.
for this kid, and
I don't know where they get that idea, but okay.
well,
I don't know.
they
I
obviously haven't spent any time
Look, this is a place with a bomb in the middle of the courtyard.
there.
Where in the world did they get the idea that this was a hospitable place to drop a child?
I so of course the kids are kind of mean to him because he's new, and the orphanage is struggling because they don't really have enough money for food and stuff, and it's just it begins with this relationship building between the kids and learning the relationships between the caretakers,
Yeah.
and in a lot of ways this reminded me Del Toro's style in this is a very clever mix between Steven Spielberg and Francois Truffaut,
Hmm.
um, especially if you can see the influence of Spielberg, especially Poltergeist. Like we were talking about, we were texting back and forth about that. Um, but Spielberg's visual influence and um, specifically Truffaut's influence from the 400 Blows and Small Change, um, that focused on kids in like a school situation, a boarding school situation kind of thing, and it's a really interesting mix, topped off with probably some of the most gorgeous cinematography by I believe it's Guillermo Navarro.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
he Del Toro really does a lot with this thing, and he builds it, and eventually, like they say, oh, there's a ghost. They call him the one who sighs, and
Which it's not actually sighing. It's actually um, it's actually a sexual liaison going on next door.
yeah,
They're hearing the noises through the wall. Partially.
but
I'm sorry.
also
Go ahead.
every time he shows up,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's this exhalation of air from somewhere,
Mhm.
and so this ghost is just kind of there. They talk about it. You see it, so you know it's there.
Mhm. Carlos sees it.
really early on.
Mhm.
Um, but most of the story centers around, and you find out why later. It centers around Jacinto, uh, played by Eduardo Noriega.
I don't know any of these actors. I don't know any of these actors at all. It's a
The only one
Spanish
that
cast. Yeah.
yeah, the only one that I recognized was Federico Lupi, who played Dr.
They,
Casares, because
yeah.
he also played the old man in Del Toro's first picture, um,
Kronos.
Kronos, and he played a part in Pan's Labyrinth. So he's been in all
Hmm.
three of Del Toro's Spanish language stuff. He's the only one that I recognized, but probably only because I had watched Kronos for the first time about 5 hours before I rewatched this for the third time. So,
The really interesting thing about this film is how the world has how it sees Carlos's world,
yeah,
because Carlos apparently comes from either middle class or upper class family. He has toys, he has comic books, he has all these things
he's
with
had a
him.
tutor.
He's had a tutor, and he's brought all these things with him, and he's impressing a lot of the boys. And there's one, Jaime,
Hmm, hmm.
who starts off as a bully,
Yeah,
really, and looks down on him, picks on him, takes things away from him. And it's interesting. You know, because of the structure of the way that Del Toro's films go, you know that it won't stay the same because his characters are never the same at the end. In
no,
films like this, are never the same at the end that they are at the beginning. And one of the things that's interesting is it's not a laugh a minute movie where you have all this community and these people going on. This is a terrible place
yeah, it is. It is. It
that has been
really is.
decimated by war. It's filthy. It's ugly. It's got
It's broken
there is
down.
there
There's
is yeah
sections of wall down, and
there's death all around. There
mhm.
is every indication that you cannot survive here.
Yeah,
And it goes into one thing that I so appreciated about it was the note that Del Toro made about this film is that how unsafe it is to be a child,
yeah.
particularly in a circumstance like this.
That's something
And
that he returns to a lot.
yeah, yeah, it's this is an ugly place. This is an
Yeah.
awful place. And it's interesting because the adults in the film, there are, I counted at least four or five.
There's four
Uh,
at the or five. Yeah, there's five at the orphanage. There's the
there's the headmistress, there's the
mhm.
doctor, there's Jacinto, there's the girl, there's the girlfriend,
Conchita.
Conchita, and then there's Alma.
Yeah, she's the
And
kind of like the the maid, I guess, or the
yeah, housekeeper.
yeah, the housekeeper.
And but I just noticed, in how ugly it all is.
Hmm.
It's wartime.
Yeah.
You don't see the battlefields. You don't
No.
see the gunfire exchange. You don't see all of the battlefield. This is the runoff from it.
Right. This is the only time that you do see that is when Dr. Caceres goes into town.
Oh God,
Um,
that's horrifying.
yeah, with Conchita, and he sees one of the communist soldiers that is regular out at the orphanage,
Hmm.
and there's what five, six of them lined up, and then they just take a pistol and shoot him in the back of the head. They turn
Shoot him
him
in the back
around,
of the head.
and Dr. Concertos is really shaken up by that.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. One, he just saw five people shot in the head in front of him.
Right. Right.
But um, to extend from that, it's because the Franco forces have now gotten to the closest town to the orphanage.
Right.
And if anyone got captured or talked, they would know that the orphanage is being run by communists
Hmm.
and that they need to get out of there for their own safety and for the safety of the kids.
And there's this whole thing going on in the orphanage where I cannot remember her name, um, the headmistress. She's this older lady,
Carmen.
Carmen. Carmen. She has a prosthetic leg,
Yeah.
and she also has a small cache of gold, which she can't get rid of, and she can't buy her way out of it because she figures that it's it's because there's no way that she can make money with gold in this form at wartime.
Right, there's that, and it's also because she's pledged to that gold to the cause.
Right,
So
right.
she gives a few ingots to the soldiers when they come, so that they can buy guns and provisions and things,
Mhm.
and keep their side going as long as possible.
There's also a personal relationship going. There's supposed to be a romance between Jacinto and Conchita, but he has a sexual relationship with Carmen,
Hmm.
and the doctor is in love with Carmen, but
Whose
he can't
husband
have,
died during a war.
mm, but he can't have sex with her because he's impotent.
Hmm.
And there's all these personal relationships. It didn't need that, but I appreciate that it gave us this kind of texture, this kind of detail, and the idea that this it'll go places
Yeah, it,
that
it
most
it
movies like this won't go.
it made us it gave us someone to care about when everything took a turn for the very much worse,
Right.
um, because not only does the ghost story start to assert itself near the end, um, but was Joaquinto
Jacinta.
Jacinto um, comes, and he's been trying to get the gold for Franco people,
Hmm.
and um, he's been taking keys to try to open the safe, and he's trying to get the gold, and then he gets run out, and he
Hmm.
comes back, and he takes all the fuel for the truck and puts it in front of the safe, and he's gonna try to blow the gasoline to blow the safe, and
Ends up killing several people.
more than several.
Yeah, he kills Alma.
Alma, Carmen, about half a dozen boys that got caught in the
Yeah,
blast.
yeah.
Um,
Again, unsafe.
yeah.
And I was really, yeah, a lot of things. Let's talk for a second about Jacinto because first of all, my first reaction was he looks like Zachary Quinto.
He does.
He does.
He
His
really does.
hair, his
I was
just
trying to I
look,
was
you know.
trying to place it because I'm like, he looks like somebody, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
exactly right. It's Zachary Quinto.
He he used to be an orphan here,
Right.
and he's grown into adulthood, probably somewhere in his late 20s, early 30s, and he's a strong young man, but he's bitter, he's angry,
Hmm.
he's prone to do things that are really horrible. He becomes the villain, but he doesn't become a traditional villain. He wants the gold as a means to get out, as a means to get away from this place.
He wants to get away. He's like King Bully
Hmm.
of the kids. He threatens them. He cuts Carlos's cheek.
That was a really strange thing because I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Because I've always had this thing about there's a certain manner that adults have around children,
He does not have it.
and there's a line that you cross
Yeah.
when the child has done something wrong. There's a line that you cross where it stops becoming about the child and it becomes about what you're doing.
Right. The the funny thing is that this slash on his cheek happens right after he says the line, if anything happens to you, I get the blame.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
that's right.
uh what is it? Jaime was coming after Carlos with a knife
Hmm.
because he thought that he'd squealed on them for doing something that they shouldn't have been doing, but it was really the doctor that kind of tricked the answer out of them and not anything to do with Carlos, really.
Was it about the water? Because there's a
Yeah.
scene early on when he knocks over his pitcher of water, and they have to sneak out at night to go get it.
Well, it's the ghost knocks it over.
The ghost knocked it over, and
Two pitchers, and
yeah,
yeah,
they have to
they
sneak
go to
out
get
to
it.
go get it, and they sneak out to go get it, and they have to sneak back. Carlos gets caught.
Mm-hmm.
Jacinto doesn't because um, Jaime, excuse me, Jaime sabotaged him,
Yeah.
and he got caught. But Carlos didn't squeal.
Right. And then the uh, the thing that kind of ended up being the thing that bridged them together was uh, Carlos throws a rock or something at Jaime and knocks him into this cistern, basically
Yeah,
this pool down in the basement of this place.
very
Um,
significant.
yeah, and they said, "Oh, he can't swim." So Carlos, who just knocked him in there, dives in and saves him.
Right.
And the knife shows up when Jacinto comes and he says, "Whose is this?" And Jaime looks really worried because he's been there for a long time and he's afraid of Jacinto.
Yeah.
So and Carlos goes, "It's mine,"
Yeah.
and he
Again,
takes
taking the
us,
blame.
yeah, takes the blame again after saying he was alone, getting the water, and he gets slashed on the cheek, and it was at that point that Jaime starts to open up a little bit with
And starts to kind of edge toward a respect
right.
for Carlos. Because Carlos is not, um, what's the word I'm,
He's not a snitch.
okay. There's a crude term that revolves around in my life. Forgive me. It's called a save ass. Basically, when you will do anything to save your own behind,
Hmm.
basically ratting out everybody else.
Right.
That's kind of he refuses to do that,
Right. No snitching.
and you never sense that it's because he wants to make friends. You sense that he's doing that because it's the right thing to do.
Right. Because
Because
if you think about where he came from,
mm,
and his father was a soldier for the left and all this kind of stuff, like you can kind of see that he probably saw his father cover for other people
right,
along the way, and he just thinks that you cover for people whether they're your friends or not. You cover for them because you don't want to get more than just one person in trouble.
right,
So it's
and
kind
these
of a,
kids constantly get in trouble.
oh yeah, yeah, it's very much a it's a soldier solidarity kind of a mindset.
Mhm.
Whereas
They're together,
whether they're
and they
yeah,
have to be because the adults. I won't say they don't care about them, but
th-
they seem to be stuck in their own.
they care about, yeah, they're doing their own thing.
Right.
Occasionally you see them in the classroom with Carmen,
Mhm.
but largely it's just they're left to just run around and just kind of be kids by themselves. There's not really a whole lot of supervision
Yeah.
because there's
They don't
only
really have
five people
time for
there.
that.
Yeah.
It's kind of this is a place. This is the runoff from war.
Yeah.
Okay, the rules don't apply anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like they're trying to, as kids, trying to maintain some measure of being
Childhood.
kids, being
Hmm.
children,
Hmm.
in the midst of the most inhospitable places. And one thing I mentioned earlier, the most symbolic thing in this movie to their situation and to the time in which this takes place, there's a bomb in the middle of the courtyard.
An unexploded bomb. It got diffused, but they couldn't get it out of the concrete. It hit
Right.
nose down, just busted down through, and like a third of it is just implanted.
And it's sticking up, most of it's sticking up out of the ground.
Right. And you think with that there that that's going to end up exploding,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it's more it's more there as a reverential kind of a thing,
Mhm,
like a reminder that death could happen at any time, but it didn't.
mhm.
But it's always lurking from the sky, from anywhere. And
Again, how unsafe it is to be a child in this environment.
mhm.
There are
And
no certainties here.
the after that whole big explosion that Jacinto carries out, he leaves and meets up with his Franco buddies.
One of whom is named Pig.
Yes, and he's a very large fellow.
Very large fellow.
Um, and Jaime finally tells the story about Santi, whom whose bed Carlos is in, who disappeared the night that the bomb dropped. Um, and Carlos had found drawings that implicated Jaime in the death of Santi. And he could see that Santi was the ghost
Hmm.
based on a couple of the drawings and when he'd actually seen him a number of times at that point, quite a few times at that point. Um, he's a child with this alabaster face mask kind of looking face with a
Hmm.
crack in it and blood just kind of drifting up.
The blood is flowing out of his skull, out of the wound in his head. This ghost. The wound is, the blood is flowing like water upwards,
Right.
and it's and
And
his
he's,
face is cracked like porcelain.
yeah, and it's such a gorgeous design for such a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Um, and so Jaime says that it was Jacinto that killed him accidentally one night down by that cistern.
Hmm.
Um, they were out gathering slugs uh, by the pool
Gathering
after
slug.
hours. I don't really understand why, but um,
It's something to do.
I guess, and it was after hours, and they were caught, and Jacinto or Jacinto, I'm not sure how to say it. I don't speak Spanish.
Jacinto,
Jacinto.
the way
Um,
they pronounce it in the movie.
yeah, Jacinto catches them and he hits or throws Santi, and it causes a big wound in his head that ultimately he bleeds out. He dies. And
His body starts to jerk, and
right,
he
right, and
dies.
he's pretty much almost dead immediately. And Jaime's there, but he doesn't. He's afraid because he's afraid that he's gonna get hit and killed too.
Gonna get killed too. Yeah.
So he kind of comforts Santi and then runs away, and Jacinto then takes the body, ties it, and throws it in the cistern, and that's why the blood is coming running out of his head going up because he's even though the head wound uh, nearly killed him, I think it was the drowning that probably eventually did kill him.
Yeah, I thought he
And
died before that because one of the things that stuck with me about the story is the scene where Jaime. Um, you have to understand, Jaime is introduced in this film as a bully,
hmm
straight up a bully. He's going to pick and nag and beat up this younger kid Carmen
and really
throughout the entire film. It
the
really
first
doesn't
time
really,
you see him over the body of Sante.
yeah. But you don't ever have the idea that eventually the character will transform to the point that we will get to um, understand his motives. We will get
Right,
to he becomes a real character rather than a cliche.
right, right.
And the most heartbreaking moment is the scene where he's leaning over the body of Sante,
hmm
and he's terrified by what he's seen. He's in agony. He's got this look on his face, and almost, and I maybe misread this, but almost seemed to be comforting Sante into death.
That's what I saw it as too. He was there for his friend, and
Maybe that
which
was why he was so bitter. Maybe that caused some of the bitterness that he
well,
had.
the bitterness was that he was ashamed of himself for being scared and not
Yeah.
standing up to Jacinto then.
Mm.
So he took it upon himself to reformat his character to be the tough guy,
Right.
which anybody who's seen The Lady from Shanghai knows there's no such thing as a tough guy. It's just somebody has an
Yeah.
edge, something that the other person doesn't have. Um,
Jaime is in danger of becoming Jacinto
yeah,
because um, this atmosphere, this environment breeds bitterness,
yeah,
and
and
what's going to
contempt,
happen?
and
What's going to happen eventually, if left? This is an odd word to use, but if left untreated,
hmm
will he will become the rotten, ugly, desiccating soul that Jacinto has become.
right, and Carlos is the remedy for that
Right.
in a lot of
Right.
ways because he isn't really afraid of Jaime.
Right.
He goes to bat for him even though there's no reason for him to. Um, and he's Carlos's just general goodness starts to chip away at the bitterness.
Yeah.
And
Starts to crack the ugly veneer
mhm.
that's kind of causing this human disease. It brings out the worst. This environment just brings out the worst in everybody,
Mhm.
as you would imagine it should, because it's horrible, it's ugly. There are sins of the past that are hanging over everybody. In particular, the death of Sante,
Right.
and it's all. This kid comes along and he has a generally good soul,
Yeah.
and
Which is
it's
really
a
kind of out of
pure
place
fault.
there.
Yeah, it's really out of place. Again, out of place. A rich kid in this environment. Whoever thought of dropping him off here? Maybe it was
Well,
because it was just so far from the war and so
maybe,
far
and
from all of that. But
because it's being run by people with a similar sensibility as the kid's father, and the way that the Francos worked, they would wipe out entire families if they were political dissidents.
right,
So that
fascist.
those, yeah, they were fascists. So anything like if the father was known as a soldier for the communists, they would kill the kid too because they don't want him espousing the same ideals that his father did down the
Right,
road and becoming a problem for the fascist government later. So
right.
they kind of preemptively purge, which there's so many things that are disgusting that's disgusting about fascism, and that is certainly one of them.
Yeah,
um, and the terrible brutality which Del Toro actually picks up again in what he considers his companion piece to this film, which is Pan's Labyrinth. Um, they're set more or less simultaneously
Right.
in different parts of Spain during the Spanish Civil War, near the end of it both times, and he kind of called Pan's Labyrinth like a spiritual sequel or a uh, a companion piece to The Devil's Backbone. He did that on
I
purpose.
I've always thought that you have to understand something. I love Del Toro's work, and as I told Doug the other day, um, while I think he's a great director,
Mhm.
I think he has not quite yet reached greatness. He's made a lot of great films, but he hasn't made a movie that I can look at and say this is probably The Devil's Backbone is the closest.
Hmm.
Um, but he hasn't made a movie that I've just jumped for joy about.
Right. Well,
Um,
this is one of my probably top 10 favorite foreign language films.
mm.
I adore this movie. And as much as I did love Pan's Labyrinth, I find myself coming back to this a lot more. Um,
I was not, and I've said this before, I was not the biggest fan of Pan's Labyrinth. And now having seen this, kind of gives me a texture as to why, because the stories are very similar.
yeah, they are.
You have a story of wartime. You have a story, I think it takes place during the war, and you have both of them take place during the war,
Hmm.
and both are juxtaposed with a fantasy element.
Hmm.
This one takes place in the world of ghosts.
Yes.
That film takes place in a world of fantasy.
Right.
I think the ghost story is more organic to it
Yeah.
than the fantasy world
I
was.
believe that. I believe that.
And that's just me, but I didn't hate Pan's Labyrinth. It's just
I'd
I did
I'd I'd
see
have
the
to
great.
rewatch it. I haven't seen it in a lot of years
I
to
haven't
be
either.
able to be able to talk about it. Maybe one day we will um, on here because I think Del
Because I do need to
Toro's.
watch it again.
Yeah, I definitely do too. Del Toro is somebody that I think we'll end up returning to. But this picture, the and we were talking about this last night when you were watching it for your second time and I was watching it for the third time. Um, the ghost and the supernatural elements are not the villain here.
No, not at all.
It's Jacinto. It's the Franco, the fascists. It's everything, and the only ghosts that show up just want justice for themselves.
Yeah.
Santi says, finally, Carlos is like, "I'm not afraid anymore. What do you want, Santi? I know it's you. What do you want?" And he goes, "Jacinto." That's it,
Yeah.
and they deliver. Yeah.
And I want to talk about this. This plays into all three of the films, all three of the ghost stories that we will talk about
Hmm.
uh, this month. It's interesting that this one has something that the other two probably don't. Now, the other two films, Poltergeist and The Shining, the ghosts are malevolent.
Very much so. Yes.
They're there to scare you to death,
Hmm.
and they're taking something. They want something
Hmm.
from you. Here, it's interesting because this is closer to something like Wings of Desire
Or the Sixth Sense.
or The Sixth Sense, where you have an entity that is remaining on Earth for a purpose,
Hmm.
but you feel the sadness
Yeah, you
of
do.
that ghost. You feel the sadness of being chained to this mortal coil
Right.
for some purpose that you cannot let go of.
Hmm. And it's funny that the rumor of the one who sighs, Santi,
Yeah,
has been around since the bomb dropped. It's been 6 8 months since that happened.
right.
And this is one of the only ghost stories that you'll find where the ghost is spectacularly recent. It's he hasn't been there for
Yeah.
hundreds of years. He's been there for a few months.
Hmm.
And he latches on to Carlos not because he sleeps in his old bed, but because he's a similar good soul. You get the impression that
Yeah.
Santi was a good soul.
Mhm.
And uncorrupted by cynicism and uncorrupted by the harshness of the reality that they were living in. And he was just down there collecting slugs. And it was an accident that he died, but there was no responsibility taken for it. And he wants responsibility taken
There
for
was
that action.
no what do you call it? Um,
There's no justice.
absolution. There was
Yeah.
no absolution.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So he
as they say in
latches on to
Titanic, waiting for an absolution that will never come.
right. So he latches on to Carlos because they're similar souls, and he knows, Santi knows that Carlos will listen, and eventually, after he gets over being terrified, he does, and he's probably the only one in that orphanage that would have taken the time to say, "I've figured out who you are. What do you
Yeah.
want? Why are you still here?" And Santi keeps saying, "Many of you will die." And it's meant to sound ominous, but it's not. Carlos thinks it's going to be at Santi's hands because he's a ghost, but it's not. He's warning him of what Jacinto is going to do, but he can't outright say some terrible stuff is going to go down that you need to prevent by stopping.
Right. Right. Right.
Because
Right.
he's not able to communicate like that,
Now,
and
you also should know Santi in this film does not morph into anything.
right.
He's exactly the same when we first see him as the last time we see him.
Mm-hmm.
He's not one of these malevolent spirits who floats around, does all of the, floats down the stairs and all. No, he's there. You can see through him, and he's always the same.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have to do anything.
Right, he's there for a purpose.
He's there for a purpose.
He's and it's glorious. The way that it's all done, and the way that the ghost story um, coalesces with the war story. And I'll grant that Jacinto being weighed down by the gold at the end is a little heavy-handed, a little on the
It's a
nose.
little on the nose. Yeah.
But it's also indicative that the gold was the only thing that was keeping him at that orphanage. He could have gone a long time ago, but he knew there was gold there, and he was trying to get it for himself to set himself up.
Yeah, he
With
brought his buddies back with him, and they were looking for it. They hide the boys they lock the boys in a room, and they start searching for it, but the other guys can't find it, and they get irritated and they leave.
right,
And just as soon as they leave, he finds the gold hidden in Carmen's prosthetic leg.
right, and it
Carmen
was
died, by the way, in the explosion.
Carmen died in the explosion, and it was funny when they were leaving.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting ready to leave. They were getting the kids on the truck because they're like, we got to go now, and they were going to go to, I think, Marseille. They were going to drive all the way to France.
Right.
And Alma says, "Are you okay?" Because she's walking really with more difficulty, and she says, "My leg is heavier today."
Yeah.
And as soon as you see the gold ingots in the now separated from Carmen leg, you're like, oh, it's not because she's being weighed down with worry. It's because she's being weighed down with 10 ingots of gold.
Right. Right. It's almost as soon as those two guys leave, Jacinto spots something glimmering. It's like Charlie in Willy Wonka when he sees the golden ticket.
Yeah.
Just happens to spot this little glimmer of gold in her leg, which is splintered. And he pulls the leg open, and all of this gold is in it. He's got this smile in his face.
Yeah.
And it's juxtaposed with this scene where the boys are fashioning sticks into spears.
They're really gonna, like, Lord of the Flies attack this kid.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because I thought of Lord of the Flies while I was watching this.
Me too, yeah.
I thought of that. These kids being forced to be, as horrible as the adults are, and even in the end when they're fashioning sticks, to stab him to death. And by the way, when they stab him,
Oh.
it hurt to watch.
Ooh,
Because
yes, it does.
Jaime, Jacinto is threatening Carlos, and Jaime comes up and stabs him in the underarm,
Yeah.
like really jams that stick up
Yeah.
in there, and Jaime's trying to get it, and Jacinto's trying to get it out. He breaks the stick,
Yeah. He can't
and then
get that part out, and then they just keep going after him. One of them goes through his arm. I mean,
yeah,
it's
oh,
brutal. It is
it's
brutal.
it's one of those death scenes where you can feel it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's terrifying, and they're delivering Jacinto to Santi.
Right,
They
right.
take him, and then they throw him in the cistern, and he's fumbling with the gold to try to see if he can get up, even though he's
He
definitely
does
gonna.
get rid of it. He does
He
get it
does.
out.
It does finally get out, but it holds him there long enough for Santi to just come up behind him and grab him.
Right, because he has a bag tied to his belt, and he has several of the bars in his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
He gets it all out, and as soon as he starts to swim up, you see from the right side of the screen, you see Santi's face, and he puts his arm around his neck and just pulls him down.
And then yeah, the air escapes out of Jacinto's mouth, and it's
It really goes into the phrase "What a way to go."
right. Oh.
Oh, there's one more thing I want to talk about. Is by the way, everybody in this movie dies. You know, almost everybody in this movie just dies. All the adults
there's
by the
like
end of this movie, all the adults are dead.
all the adults are dead. There's a half a dozen kids that start to try to trek into town. One of them with a
There's
broken ankle, with a broken foot.
Yeah, there's like 4 kids left. And but I want to talk about. I really love the character, Dr. Cesar's.
Oh yes,
I love this character because
he was wonderful.
you think he's going to be this. Um, you look at him and you assume that he's going to be this stern, hateful administrator, and and almost immediately the movie kind of pushes that idea out of your mind because he's a good soul.
He's one of the nicest people ever.
But he has this weird thing where he's making spiced rum that is being fermented in jars with half-formed human fetuses.
Okay. So
Tell me about this.
okay. He's not actually making it. That's what they were pickled in
Yeah.
a long time ago. And I think because he is a doctor, he has these it's like he's also got like his own laboratory.
Yeah.
So cuz he actually calls it his lab.
Yeah.
So
What it looks like.
he's got these fetuses in the jars, and one of them has an exposed spinal column,
Right.
which is what he says is called the devil's backbone. And as near as I can figure it, as near as I can find, it's a version, an intense version of spina bifida.
Uh-huh.
And he has these examples of maladies there, but what they were pickled in, however long ago they were pickled, is in rum and a bunch of other spices and things to preserve the bodies. But he says this is very, very old rum, and he sells it in town to keep the orphanage afloat, because there's said to be health benefits to drinking rum that fetuses are pickled in. I don't know. It goes on with this whole superstition thing that he's trying to dissuade Carlos from thinking that there is a ghost. Because
Well, and there's also this whole thing where people used to think that spinal bifida was a curse.
right.
The mother was cursed, and then they found out that,
It's just a folic acid deficiency.
and there's something about the mother not receiving enough nutrition,
right.
and it caused. He was trying to bring it down to a scientific level,
Mm-hmm.
and get away from the idea of hoodoos and curses and all of these
Right.
things.
And he said it can help calm nervous conditions, and they say it can even cure impotence.
Yeah,
And
because he
he
takes a
said,
pop off of it.
well,
Takes
he's,
takes a shot of it.
he puts it into a shot glass, and he goes, so if you're gonna talk about ghosts, then you might as well just drink this to heal the cut on your face, because this was
Oh
after
God.
Jacinto cut him. And he's like, nope, I don't think I saw a ghost. And he runs off, and then you see the doctor drink it,
Take a shot of it.
saying, it's nonsense that it would cure impotence, but he's willing to give it a shot, because he says
Yeah.
old guys will do anything to, and then he brings his finger up, and he's like,
Yeah.
you understand.
Yeah.
And he is one of those old guys that'll do anything to get his finger up. So
He becomes almost an admirable figure, because at the end of the
yeah,
film, when when Jacinto is on his way back with his buddies
hmm
to raid the place and blow it up and look for the gold, he's sitting in a chair with a rifle, waiting for them to come back,
a shotgun.
a shotgun, and dies of his wounds.
Yeah,
And the boys are upset by this,
very much so.
and I think it's really what spurs them to become to really take on the role, the vengeful role of protecting themselves, or the role of protecting themselves rather.
Right.
And they're upset by the fact that the doctor has died.
Very much so. Yes.
And again, something I was really surprised was even in here, because death in movies like this typically is waved off.
Right.
You
Not
know,
only is it waved off, but he's the caretaker at an orphanage.
right?
How many orphanage caretakers, if the woman that ran the orphanage in Annie, or the guy at the head of the food line in Oliver died, would they be upset? They
Or
wouldn't
Jane
be.
Eyre, Mr.
Jane Eyre.
Brocklehurst.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, they wouldn't be upset by uh, these deaths, but this caretaker, and I think that they were upset by Carmen dying too,
yeah.
but not as much as the kindly doctor, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, and
And
I thought of this again, going back to this theme of death, is that when we talked about Poltergeist, we talked about um, death is death is all around you, but in that environment, it was tricky because life was all around you,
hmm hmm
and it was harder to really grasp if something would come in and take you away or scare you
right,
or whatever.
but
Here,
in
it's very much it's right under your feet.
the landscape is dead.
The
The
landscape is absolutely dead.
the country is at war. They the 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 girl Conchita even says, when there's that big explosion in the kitchen, um, they won't have heard that in town because it's one boom out of many.
Yeah,
They won't
yeah.
even notice it.
Mhm.
So there's literally death very near them. All of the ground around them is just dead sand, desert, arid climate. Just nothing grows, and the bomb again is a reminder that anything can happen to them at any time.
Right.
So there's this literal specter of death
Mhm.
hovering over them
Yeah,
throughout the entire thing. And they have to try to be kids knowing that.
yeah. You have to ultimately be a child
Yeah.
in the
And
middle of this horror show that's going on around you. And even in normal circumstances, even on the laziest day in this orphanage, there's still a horror show going on around you,
yeah, yeah.
because there's all this adult drama, there's all this things, and there's always the specter of the fact that somebody could sweep in and kill everybody.
Right. Yeah. So, and then to have this ghost story kind of be on top of it just adds a layer of fear and uncertainty to everything. And the way that the Santi story kind of comes in and becomes primary for a little bit at the end, and then it once it's resolved, it's resolved.
Hmm.
Like there's not more going on, but when Santi's soul is at rest after he gets Jacinto, the doctor comes back
Right.
as a ghost to protect the orphanage, even though there's nobody there. He's the
Even though
one,
there's no real orphanage left.
right? He's the one that's narrating it. He starts narrating at the beginning, and then
Hmm.
and then he repeats his narration at the end, and then he says, and then the ghost, that's what I am.
Hmm.
And so he recounted this story from beyond the grave and brought it back. It's a lot like in its way, it's kind of like a Sunset Boulevard, narrated by a dead man.
Yeah.
Um, so it's
Only there
really
he wasn't a ghost.
right. Well, he was just a corpse, um, which goes into the cynicism of Billy Wilder, which we will get into on this show. Um,
Well, my real final thought on this, my real cap on this is that something we talked about a long time ago when we talked about Pinocchio, and we talked about I mentioned that one of the most detrimental things to ever happen to children in movies was Home Alone,
mhm, mhm.
because it created this idea that kids in movies spout one-liners,
Yeah,
have fun adventures all the time, one-upping adults, and that kind of thing.
yeah.
And there's no danger really,
Mhm.
and it's really and one of the things it goes into one of the things that Del Toro said. He said they forget how unsafe the world is for a child.
Mhm.
This movie is about that,
Right.
very much so, very much about how dangerous the world is,
Mhm.
and it's symbolized, I think, by that scene in the flashback where Jaime is standing in the courtyard and this bomb hits the ground a few feet in front of him and just
Right.
it's just there.
Yeah.
It's like it's death literally a few inches in front of him,
Mhm.
and it's fascinating to me
Yeah.
that the movie would go there. I don't
Mhm.
know if a Hollywood studio would make a movie like this.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Even though apparently when the American distributor was buying, I think it was Paramount was buying Kronos, they were buying it to remake it, and Del
Mhm.
Toro was like, "No, you can't remake it. What are you going to watch Jack Lemmon lick blood off the bathroom floor?" Like,
Yeah,
yeah. But this is not something that could be retold
no.
from an American Hollywood point of view.
Mhm.
This is very specific to that kind of a mindset. It wouldn't be able to be set here anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and my final thought is it's just it's a refreshing ghost story because it's not the center of it, but it elevates the fear and terror of an
It's about the
already
sins of the past.
yeah, it's a fearsome and terrifying scenario made more so by this specter that they don't understand.
Hmm.
And um, I think this is the kind of thing that I always gravitate more to than like a slasher picture or something. It's this element of the supernatural um, without really having the it be malicious or be need to be the center of the story, because it's really allegorically saying that the war is scarier than the ghost.
Hmm.
And that's a very different track
And
that
the unknown of it, the
right,
unknown. You don't
right,
know what you're looking at. You don't know
exactly.
what it'll do to you.
So
Which falls
um
into the film we're going to talk about next week.
yes, it does. So
The first recommendations.
yes,
Go ahead
Ter-
with your recommendation.
I would recommend with this the Del Toro's other two Spanish language films that we were talking about, Kronos and Pan's Labyrinth. They form a really interesting, not so much a trilogy, but definitely veins that the supernatural is part of the practical world, and the practical world is maybe worse than even some of the more fantastical elements of life.
The real world is more horrifying than the spiritual world anyway.
Right, right.
The
And
supernatural world.
I would also pony off of that, not only thrillers or horror movies that are of the ilk, that like The Shining or Poltergeist, but I would also go back to my Truffaut recommendations, The 400 Blows and Small Change, and even Louis Mel's Au revoir les enfants, that deal with this kind of childhood without the supernatural element in it. But you can definitely see with those three films where Del Toro got his focus,
Yeah.
and then he incorporated more of a gothic sense, which he also did with Crimson Peak, and in an effort to prove that a gothic horror movie can make money, because he's been trying to get H.P. Lovecraft's In the Mountain of Madness made for a decade or more, which is a crazy story. I've read the book. It is insane, and if anybody was going to translate it, I would only trust Del Toro to do it because of his visual sense. But yeah, those are my recommendations. How about you, Jerry?
Well, if you know Del Toro, you know that he's very ubiquitous as far as what he does. He's a director, he's a writer, he's a producer, he does
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things. But if you really try to find a through line in his work, he's really fascinated with the land of the dead.
Yeah.
He's really fascinated. You can see it in Hellboy, you can see it in
Mm-hmm.
these three films, you can see it in certainly in Crimson Peak.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a rare happy film that I want to recommend that he produced. It's an animated movie from 2014 called The Book of Life.
Oh, that was so good.
It is a gorgeous animated musical, and it is wonderful. And
It
it's
really
about
is.
the origins of the I don't know how to pronounce it, the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
But it's a love story. It's a musical.
Is
It's
it
happy. It's wonderful.
is it Deus
And
Ex
not many.
Mortis?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And not many people saw it.
No, and it was.
Unfortunately, I saw it actually in a theater on a Wednesday night by myself,
I saw it in a
with
theater with
nobody
my.
else in the theater.
I saw it in a theater with my son, and we ended up buying it. So I've seen it at least two more times. I
There is a
agree with that. That's
scene in
really
that
good.
movie. There's a scene in that movie where it's a love story, and the boy is singing to the girl. He's playing a sort of Spanish rendition of "I Can't Help Falling in Love with You."
Yeah,
That is one of the most magical things I've ever seen in a movie. I love that movie to death,
it's really really good. I
and I
agree.
want people to really look for that.
Yeah,
The other recommendation, if you want to check out The Devil's Backbone, you have to piggyback it with Kronos.
yeah, you kind of
Kronos
do.
was Kronos was his first film.
Mm-hmm.
It's a visual, it's visually brilliant,
Absolutely,
and it
yeah.
stars the same actor who plays the Doctor in Devil's Backbone,
Mm-hmm.
and
In a
it's
very different role.
a very very different role. I'm not going to say a word about it because I don't want to give too much away, but yeah, those two. If you want Del Toro recommendations, those are mine.
Okay.
So I guess we're gonna wrap this one up.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
ne-
that's a wrap on the Devil's Backbone. What are we doing next?
Next week we are moving into something recent. This is my pick. This is a very bizarre, strange movie that people are so divided on. It's a strange movie called It Follows. From 2015, and
Hmm.
again, it's another movie I want people to discover.
It's yeah. We'll talk about that. We'll get into this. This was my first viewing of that one. So I'll probably watch it again before we go into the booth, as it were. Uh, but it's an interesting picture. Following that is my pick, which has fluctuated about 10 different times, but I finally settled on Psycho,
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 masterpiece, because I wanted to get some kind of a slasher picture in, and that's the only one that I like. So, and then of course we discussed we're going to do The Shining, and then we're going to launch into Turkey Month in November, where
Oh,
we
so much
discuss
fun. Bad movies, a whole month of bad
a
movies. I'm looking
whole month of bad movies. We're doing God's Not Dead 1 and 2. We're doing Dreamcatcher. We're doing
for. Crappy
tentatively
romance movie called Sweet
Sweet
November. I can't
November.
wait for that.
See, we were constantly changing things up. I know we announced that it was going to be Batman Forever, but scheduling change is going to be Sweet November, with Keanu Reeves and Charlize Theron, and then to cap off Turkey Month is my pick with M. Night Shyamalan's The Village.
I've
Because it
seen
was.
that. I won't forgive you for that.
Hey, I made you watch Dreamcatcher. I think Dreamcatcher's worse, but Village is just anyway. So we'll get more into our future schedules in future episodes. But right now, I want to say thank you for listening to us and sticking with us, and we definitely appreciate you listening. And if you want to watch the movies before and then listen to our commentaries, or if you want to listen to us first and then get into the movie after you've heard us ramble on about it, that's up to you. But we definitely encourage you to see the movies that we're talking about, because they do hold a special place in our heart, for good or for ill. The ill coming up, and thank you very much. Give us your likes, give us your comments. If there's anything that you want us to talk about after the first of the year next year, let us know, and we'll be happy to acquire it and tackle it, and let you know what we think of whatever you're suggesting. If you want to hear us talk about something, uh, I guess that's kind of a shot in the dark,
Pod
but
Bay doors are open to you.
yes, but not anymore for this episode. So as we say goodbye, just remind you, you can find my writing, Doug Heller, at talkmovietome.com, where I do film reviews and historical pieces. You can find me on Twitter at talkmovietome and the number 1. You can find Jerry at armchaircinema.com and his life's work at Armchair Oscars.
And you can find all of our past episodes at the podbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com.
Yes, all of our stuff is there, along with sharing. We're kind of squatting at our Cave of Wonders YouTube channel for now, but that way you can see all of them too, and so and you can find Jerry at Armchair CMA on Twitter. And I think that about wraps it up for us. Thank you very much. And the pod bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.